November 20th, 1943. Tarawa Atoll, Gilbert Islands. The landing craft carrying the 2nd Marine Division ground to a halt 500 yards from shore. The tide tables were wrong. Coral reefs that should have been submerged under 5 feet of water barely lay beneath the surface. The Marines had no choice but to climb out and wade through chest-deep water under withering Japanese machine gun fire. What followed was one of the bloodiest 76 hours in Marine Corps history. Over 1,000 Marines killed, nearly 2,300 wounded. Many drowned in the lagoon, weighed down by equipment, cut down by gunfire before they could reach the beach. The bodies floated among the coral for days. But the true tragedy was that it could have been prevented. The underwater obstacles, the coral formations, the reef structure, all of it could have been mapped, cleared, or avoided if someone had surveyed the approach beforehand. If someone had gone in first underwater to scout the invasion route. No such unit existed. Not yet. This story is about how the disaster at Tarawa created the most elite maritime special operations force in history. How a handful of Navy swimmers transformed from beach surveyors into combat demolition experts. How they became the first Frogmen, the original operators who would eventually evolve into the Navy SEALs. The mathematics of amphibious warfare in World War II were brutal. To invade a defended island, you needed overwhelming force concentrated on a narrow beach. But that same concentration made your troops vulnerable to obstacles, mines, and fortifications. The Japanese understood this perfectly. They turned every potential landing beach into a death trap. After Tarawa, Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, commander of Amphibious Forces Pacific, demanded answers. He wanted someone who could scout beaches before invasions, someone who could clear obstacles, someone who could swim into hostile waters and come back alive with intelligence that would save thousands of lives. The problem was that no such capability existed anywhere in the U.S. military. The Navy had salvage divers, but they worked in calm harbors, not combat zones. The Marines were assault troops, not underwater specialists. The solution would require creating something entirely new. The answer began to take shape at Fort Pierce, Florida, a desolate stretch of coastline chosen specifically because nobody wanted to be there. The mosquitoes were legendary. The heat was oppressive. The waters were shark-infested. It was perfect. In January 1944, the Naval Combat Demolition Unit training program officially began. The goal was simple, insane, and necessary. Train men to swim into enemy-held beaches, scout obstacles, plant explosives, and get out alive. Do it in broad daylight if necessary. Do it under fire. Do it when everyone said it was impossible. The first volunteers came from the Navy's construction battalions, the Seabees, and from the naval demolition units being trained for European operations. They were joined by selected Navy personnel who showed aptitude for swimming, demolitions, and most importantly, the ability to function under extreme stress. Lieutenant Commander Draper Kaufman, a naval officer who had previously served with the British Royal Navy clearing unexploded bombs during the London Blitz, was given command of the training program. Kaufman had seen what explosives could do to the human body. He'd lost friends to bombs that detonated while being defused. He understood that the men he was about to train would face similar dangers, but underwater, in enemy territory, with no margin for error. The training Kaufman designed was deliberately brutal. He believed that if men could survive his training, they could survive combat. The washout rate exceeded 70%. Those who remained became something unprecedented in military history. The evolution that would define UDT training for decades began simply. A morning run. Nothing extreme, just 5 miles through soft sand in combat boots, followed by calisthenics. Hundreds of push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, then ocean swims in the cold Atlantic. Then more runs, then demolition training, then more swims. Day after day, week after week, until the weak quit and the strong became stronger. Kaufman introduced an innovation that would become legendary. Hell Week, 7 days of continuous training with minimal sleep. The trainees would run until they collapsed, then be ordered to swim. They'd swim until hypothermia set in, then be ordered to run again. They'd practice demolitions while exhausted, handle live explosives with shaking hands, make split-second calculations when their minds screamed for rest. The logic was simple but profound. Combat doesn't wait until you're rested. The enemy doesn't care if you're cold, exhausted, or terrified. If you can function while your body is shutting down, you can function anywhere. One trainee, Seaman Bill Dawson, later recalled the experience. We thought we were tough when we arrived. Construction workers, athletes, guys who'd done hard labor their whole lives. Hell Week broke all of us down to nothing. Then it rebuilt us into something else, something that didn't quit. The physical training was only part of the program. The real innovation was in what they were being trained to do: hydrographic reconnaissance, the technical term for swimming into hostile beaches and surveying them. It sounded simple. It was anything but. The men learned to measure water depth using lead lines while swimming. They practiced identifying underwater obstacles by touch in zero visibility. They memorized tide tables, learned to read currents, studied how waves break over different bottom compositions. They became experts at determining whether a beach could support the weight of landing craft, tanks, and thousands of troops. More critically, they learned demolitions. Not the careful, methodical work of peacetime engineers, but combat demolition. How to pack the maximum explosive power into waterproof containers. How to place charges on obstacles to achieve maximum destruction. How to wire multiple explosive packs together so they detonated simultaneously. How to do all of this while swimming in darkness with enemy soldiers shooting at you. The explosive of choice was C2, a plastic explosive developed during the war. It was waterproof, stable, and devastatingly powerful. A 20-pound pack could destroy a reinforced concrete obstacle. The UDT men learned to swim with these packs, to place them precisely, to wire detonation systems that wouldn't fail even when submerged in salt water. By May 1944, the first UDT teams were ready. Teams 1 and 2 deployed to England, preparing for the invasion of France. Teams 3 and 4 headed to the Pacific, where the island-hopping campaign was accelerating and where every beach was defended, every approach mined, every landing a potential massacre. The European UDT teams participated in reconnaissance operations before D-Day, but their role was limited. The beaches of Normandy were surveyed primarily by British and American combat engineers working from landing craft. The real test of the UDT concept would come in the Pacific, where the unique geography demanded underwater operations. Kwajalein Atoll, January 31, 1944. Before the main landings, UDT teams were sent to scout the beaches. This was their first operational deployment. The mission was straightforward on paper: swim to the beach in daylight, measure depths, identify obstacles, return alive. What made this insane was that it had to be done in full view of Japanese defenders. The UDTs approached the beach at high speed in rubber boats launched from destroyer escorts. At 300 yards from shore, they rolled over the sides into the water and began swimming toward an enemy that could see them clearly. Chief Petty Officer Francis Douglas Riley led one of the first recon swims at Kwajalein. The Japanese opened fire the moment we hit the water. Machine guns, rifles, mortars. The water erupted around us. We swam anyway. The mission was to get information. Getting shot at was just part of the job. The swimmers moved in pairs, taking depth soundings every few yards, noting the locations of coral heads, identifying potential obstacles. They used wax pencils to write notes on plastic slates strapped to their wrists. Water depth, bottom composition, obstacle locations. All while bullets kicked up spray around them. The innovation that saved them was their support. Navy destroyers moved in close, so close their keels nearly scraped the coral, and provided covering fire. The destroyers' 5-inch guns pounded Japanese positions, suppressing enemy fire just enough to give the swimmers a chance. But the real protection came from an unexpected source. The UDT men discovered that by staying just below the surface, they became nearly impossible to hit. Japanese soldiers firing from beach bunkers had to aim at an angle that caused their bullets to skip off the water's surface. Bullets that penetrated lost velocity rapidly in the water. The swimmers learned to duck under whenever fire became too intense, then surface to continue their work. After 2 hours in the water, the UDT teams returned with detailed intelligence about the Kwajalein approaches. The landing the next day proceeded with minimal casualties. The Marines hit beaches that had been surveyed, where water depths were known, where hidden obstacles had been identified and marked. Admiral Turner was convinced the UDT concept worked. Now they needed to prove they could do more than scout. They needed to show they could clear obstacles under fire. The opportunity came at Saipan on June 15, 1944. Japanese defenders had prepared extensive underwater obstacles. Coral had been shaped into tank traps. Logs had been driven into the sand to tear the bottoms out of landing craft. Wire obstacles stretched beneath the surface to entangle propellers. Clearing these obstacles would require getting close enough to place explosives, wiring them together, and detonating them, all while under enemy observation. UDT Teams 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 were assigned to the Saipan operation. Over 300 swimmers total. Their mission was unprecedented in scope. Clear 3,000 yards of beach obstacles in daylight before the main landing. Lieutenant Commander Kaufman, who'd created the training program, personally led one of the teams at Saipan. He believed leaders should share the same risks as their men. As his team approached the beach in rubber boats, Japanese artillery opened fire. The first shell landed 50 yards short, Kaufman later wrote in his after-action report. The second landed 10 yards over. The third landed directly on top of one of our boats. 6 men gone instantly. We kept going. The surviving boats reached the drop-off point. The swimmers rolled into the water and began their approach. This time, they weren't just scouting. They were carrying explosives, 20-pound packs of C2 strapped to their bodies, waterproof fuses, date cord to connect multiple charges. The technique they'd developed in training proved its worth. Swimming in pairs, one man would identify an obstacle while his partner prepared the explosive pack. They'd place the charge, prime the fuse, connect the DT cord, and move to the next obstacle. The DT cord would link all the charges together, allowing them to be detonated simultaneously. Petty Officer First Class. Robert Christensen was placing charges on log obstacles when a Japanese machine gun found the range. I felt the impacts hitting the logs, saw wood splinters erupting around me. My partner and I went underwater, finished wiring the charge while submerged, then surfaced 20 yards away. The Japanese were shooting at where we'd been, not where we were. The UDT developed a tactic they called rolling thunder. As one pair of swimmers moved to place charges, another pair would surface behind them, drawing fire. Then a third pair would surface in a different location. The Japanese couldn't track all the swimmers simultaneously. By the time defenders shifted fire to a new target, the swimmers had gone under and resurfaced elsewhere. After 3 hours of continuous work under fire, over 900 obstacles had been rigged with explosives. The UDT teams withdrew to a safe distance. At the signal, a firing party detonated the charges. The explosion was visible from the command ships 10 miles offshore. A wall of water and debris rose 100 feet into the air. When it settled, a 3,000-yard lane of clear beach stretched from deep water to the shoreline. The obstacles that would have torn apart landing craft and killed hundreds of Marines simply ceased to exist. The Marine landing at Saipan the next morning proceeded through the cleared lanes with minimal interference from underwater obstacles. The UDTs had proven their concept decisively. They could operate in daylight, under fire, and accomplish missions that conventional units couldn't attempt. But the Japanese were learning too. At Tinian, just days after Saipan, enemy defenders had positioned machine guns specifically to target swimmers. They'd studied UDT tactics and developed countermeasures. The water was too shallow for destroyers to provide close support. The UDT teams would be exposed. Lieutenant Commander Robert Marshall led UDT Team 5 on the Tinian reconnaissance. His team discovered the changed Japanese tactics within minutes of entering the water. The machine gun fire was precise and sustained. They'd positioned guns to create crossing fields of fire over the approach lanes. We took casualties immediately. Ensign Louis F. Luers was killed by machine gun fire while measuring water depths 100 yards from shore. Seaman James E. Green was hit while placing demo charges on a coral formation. The UDT teams learned a harsh lesson. The enemy was adapting. The techniques that worked at Kwajalein and Saipan wouldn't work forever. The solution came from an unexpected source. Navy underwater demolition teams began experimenting with smoke screens. Destroyers would lay chemical smoke just offshore, creating a dense fog that obscured the swimmers from Japanese gunners. The smoke didn't make the UDTs invisible, but it reduced enemy accuracy significantly. Combined with the smoke, the teams began using new approach tactics. Instead of swimming directly toward the beach, they'd approach at an angle, using the sun's position to silhouette themselves against the glare. Japanese soldiers firing into the sun had difficulty tracking targets. The swimmers learned to read light angles like predators studying prey. The Tinian operation ultimately succeeded, but at cost. 3 UDT swimmers killed, 14 wounded. The casualty rate was considered acceptable, given the number of marine lives saved by clearing the beaches, but the men who died weren't statistics to their teammates. "We lost Luers on his 3rd operation," Christensen recalled decades later. "He was 23 years old, engaged to be married. He died measuring water depth so Marines could land safely. There's no glory in that death, just necessity." By the fall of 1944, UDT tactics had evolved into a refined system. Pre-landing reconnaissance would be conducted by small teams, usually at night, using techniques borrowed from submarine operations. The swimmers would paddle in on rubber boats, slip over the side a mile from shore, and swim in using compass bearings. They'd scout the beaches in darkness, marking obstacles with small buoys that would be visible only from the sea. The following day, larger demolition teams would approach in daylight, protected by naval gunfire and smoke screens. They'd clear the marked obstacles using the synchronized demolition techniques perfected at Saipan. The entire operation, from recon to demolition, could be completed in 36 hours. But the Japanese had one more surprise. At Peleliu in September 1944, UDT teams discovered that the enemy had stopped defending the beaches. Instead, Japanese forces had withdrawn inland to prepared positions in caves and fortified bunkers. The underwater obstacles were minimal. The beaches were relatively clear. This presented a new problem. If the Japanese weren't defending the beaches, where were they? The UDT's mission expanded. They began conducting inland reconnaissance, swimming to shore at night, moving inland on foot to scout Japanese positions, then returning to the water before dawn. This was beyond their original mandate. These were no longer demolition swimmers. They were becoming reconnaissance commandos, operating behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence. Some teams began carrying weapons, usually Thompson submachine guns wrapped in waterproof cases. The mission was evolving. At Leyte Gulf in October 1944, UDT Team 10 conducted what may have been the first combat raid by a UDT unit. A team of 6 swimmers landed on a small island held by Japanese forces. Their mission was to destroy a radio station that was reporting on U.S. naval movements. The team moved inland silently, located the radio station, planted explosives, and withdrew to the beach. The demolition destroyed the station and killed the Japanese operators. The swimmers were back aboard their ship before sunrise. The mission was technically outside their charter, but it demonstrated the expanding capabilities of the UDT concept. By early 1945, UDT operations had become routine parts of Pacific amphibious assaults. Every major landing was preceded by UDT reconnaissance and obstacle clearance. The teams had developed specialized equipment: underwater slates for writing notes, waterproof watches, dive knives designed specifically for cutting wire obstacles, explosive packs configured for different types of obstacles. The men themselves had become athletes of remarkable capability. UDT swimmers could cover 2 miles in open ocean, place demolition charges on multiple obstacles, and return to their pickup point, all while maintaining situational awareness of enemy fire and friendly support. But the ultimate test was coming. Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the final stepping stones to Japan itself. These would be the most heavily defended islands in the Pacific. The casualties would be staggering. The UDTs would face their greatest challenges. February 17, 1945, Iwo Jima. UDT teams 12, 13, 14, and 15 approached the volcanic island's beaches for pre-landing reconnaissance. Japanese defenders had spent months preparing. The beaches were extensively mined. Underwater obstacles filled the approach lanes, and the Japanese had positioned artillery to create interlocking fields of fire over every possible landing zone. What made Iwo Jima unique was the beach composition itself. The volcanic sand was loose and deep, making it difficult for vehicles to gain traction. The UDTs needed to determine if the beaches could support the weight of tanks and heavy equipment. This required taking sand samples from multiple depths, analyzing the composition under fire. Commander Marshall, now commanding all UDT operations at Iwo Jima, made a controversial decision. The reconnaissance would be conducted in daylight, in full view of Japanese defenders, with maximum naval gunfire support. The idea was to use the recon mission itself as a diversion, drawing Japanese fire and revealing their artillery positions before the main landing. It worked, but at tremendous cost. The UDTs approached the beaches in landing craft personnel reconnaissance boats, smaller and faster than standard landing craft. As they neared the shore, Japanese artillery opened up with devastating accuracy. 12 reconnaissance boats were hit in the first 10 minutes. The swimmers went into the water under the heaviest fire any UDT team had yet experienced. Machine guns, artillery, mortars, rifle fire from hundreds of concealed positions. The water boiled with impacts. Boatswain's Mate First Class. John McKinnon led a demolition team through the chaos. We swam through shell splashes. You'd surface and see waterspouts erupting all around you. The noise was incredible. You couldn't hear your buddy shouting from 3 feet away. We just kept working, measuring depths, marking obstacles. That's what we were there to do. The UDT team spent 2 hours in the water at Iwo Jima, the longest combat swim to date. They took detailed soundings, identified over 2,000 obstacles, and mapped the entire landing zone. The intelligence they gathered was critical for the Marine landing 3 days later, but the cost was severe. 1 LCP boat was sunk with all hands. 43 UDT swimmers were wounded. 1, Seaman First Class James Morrison, was killed by artillery fire while placing a marker buoy. The casualty rate approached 15%, the highest of any UDT operation. Yet the mission was considered a success. The intelligence was accurate and complete. The Marines landed on beaches that had been thoroughly surveyed. The underwater obstacles had been identified and marked. Most importantly, the UDT reconnaissance had revealed over 150 Japanese artillery positions that were subsequently destroyed by naval gunfire before the main landing. Admiral Turner personally visited the UDT teams after the Iwo Jima operation. His message was simple. You saved thousands of lives today. The Marines know it. I know it. Your country knows it. The final evolution of UDT operations in World War II came at Okinawa, the last major amphibious assault of the Pacific War. By April 1945, UDT tactics had reached their peak sophistication. Night reconnaissance, daytime demolition under smoke cover, coordinated naval gunfire support. The teams operated like surgical instruments, precise and effective. But Okinawa introduced new challenges. The island was enormous compared to previous targets. The coastline stretched for miles. The Japanese had learned from their defeats and constructed elaborate underwater defenses. Most significantly, they'd positioned kamikaze boats and swimmers among the obstacles, living mines waiting to attack landing craft. UDT teams 7, 11, 12, 16, 17, and 21 were assigned to Okinawa. Over 500 swimmers. Their mission was to clear 8 separate landing beaches simultaneously, the largest UDT operation of the war. The reconnaissance phase began on March 26, 1945. Teams approached the beaches at night, swimming through darkness using compass navigation. What they discovered shocked them. The Japanese had created 3 lines of defense: wooden posts driven into the sand at water's edge, steel rails embedded in coral at the 6-foot depth line, and wire obstacles stretching from 12 feet depth to the beach. Moreover, Japanese combat swimmers had been positioned among the obstacles. Armed with magnetic mines, these enemy frogmen were supposed to attack American swimmers or landing craft. The UDT teams found themselves in direct combat with enemy swimmers for the first time. Petty Officer Second Class. Anthony Mazza encountered a Japanese swimmer while placing demo charges on a steel obstacle. I surfaced to take a bearing, and there he was, maybe 10 feet away. We stared at each other for maybe 2 seconds. Then we both dove. I had a knife. He had a mine. I went deep and fast, came up 30 yards away and signaled for support. 2 of my teammates went after him. I never found out what happened. We had work to do. The UDT teams cleared the Okinawa beaches over 4 days of continuous operations. They destroyed over 3,000 obstacles. They engaged and eliminated an unknown number of Japanese combat swimmers. They took casualties from enemy fire, friendly fire incidents, and exhaustion. But they completed the mission. When the Marines and Army troops landed on April 1, 1945, they hit beaches that were clear of obstacles, thoroughly surveyed, and safe for vehicle traffic. The landing at Okinawa was the smoothest major amphibious operation of the Pacific War. The UDTs had perfected their craft. By the time Japan surrendered in August 1945, the Underwater Demolition Teams had conducted operations at Kwajalein, Roinamer, Saipan, Tinian, Guam, Peleliu, Angaur, Ulithi, Leyte, Lingayen Gulf, Zambales, Iwo Jima, Karamaretto, and Okinawa. They'd cleared hundreds of miles of beach, destroyed tens of thousands of obstacles, saved countless thousands of lives. Their casualty rate was roughly 3% killed or wounded, remarkably low given the nature of their missions, but each casualty represented a highly trained specialist who couldn't be easily replaced. The men who died swimming into hostile beaches weren't conscripts or replacements. They were volunteers who'd chosen the most dangerous job in the Navy. After the war, UDT capabilities continued to evolve. During the Korean War, UDT swimmers conducted reconnaissance operations before the Incheon landing, the most audacious amphibious assault since D-Day. They cleared mines from Wonsan Harbor under fire. They demolished bridges and tunnels behind enemy lines. In Vietnam, UDT teams trained South Vietnamese forces in maritime operations. They conducted riverine warfare missions. They evolved into the sea, air, and land teams, the SEALs, that would become legendary for direct action missions far beyond the original UDT mandate. But the core capabilities remained unchanged. Swimming into hostile territory, operating under impossible conditions, accomplishing missions that conventional forces couldn't attempt. The Frogmen of World War II established a tradition that continues today. In 1983, the UDT designation was officially retired. All remaining UDT teams were redesignated as SEAL teams. The Frogs had evolved into something more lethal, but the DNA remained the same. The ability to operate in maritime environments, the physical conditioning that bordered on superhuman, the absolute refusal to quit under any circumstances. Today's Navy SEALs trace their lineage directly to those first UDT volunteers who reported to Fort Pierce in 1944. The training evolved. Hell Week got harder, not easier. The missions expanded from beach reconnaissance to global counterterrorism. But the fundamental principle remained. Ordinary men pushed beyond normal human limits become capable of extraordinary things. Lieutenant Commander Draper Kaufman, the man who created UDT training, retired as a rear admiral in 1973. He never took personal credit for the UDT legacy. "I just designed training that prepared men for reality," he said in a 1982 interview. The men themselves did the impossible. They swam into enemy fire when everyone said it couldn't be done. They cleared beaches that saved thousands of lives. They proved that with the right training, the right mindset, and the right motivation, humans can accomplish anything. The disaster at Tarawa killed over 1,000 Marines because nobody had scouted the beaches. After the UDTs were established, no major American amphibious landing suffered similar casualties from underwater obstacles. The mathematics were simple. Sending a dozen swimmers to clear a beach was dangerous. Sending thousands of Marines onto an uncleared beach was catastrophic. The men who volunteered for the UDTs understood they were being trained for a mission with no historical precedent. Navies had been conducting amphibious operations for thousands of years, but nobody had ever thought to send swimmers ahead to clear the way. The concept was born from desperation after Tarawa and proven through courage in dozens of subsequent operations. What transformed beach surveyors into combat specialists was the nature of their missions. You couldn't scout an enemy beach from a distance. You had to swim close enough to touch the obstacles. You had to measure depths by hand. You had to distinguish between natural coral and man-made fortifications. All of this required getting close to the enemy. And once you were that close, you were in combat whether you wanted to be or not. The decision to arm UDT swimmers came gradually. Initially, they carried only knives for cutting through wire obstacles. Then they started carrying sidearms for self-defense, then submachine guns for close combat, then demolitions for offensive missions. Each evolution expanded their capabilities and their mandate. By 1945, UDT teams were conducting missions that looked nothing like beach reconnaissance, raiding, sabotage, behind-the-lines intelligence gathering. They'd become special operations forces by necessity, not by design. The Navy eventually recognized this reality and formalized it by creating the SEAL teams in 1962. The legacy of those first Frogmen extends beyond military history. The physical conditioning standards they established influenced athletic training worldwide. The mental toughness required to complete Hell Week became a case study in human performance. The small unit tactics they developed influenced special operations doctrine for generations. More importantly, they proved that proper selection and training could create capabilities that didn't previously exist. Before 1944, maritime special operations were considered impossible. Swimmers couldn't operate in combat zones. Demolitions couldn't be placed under fire. Reconnaissance couldn't be conducted in daylight on hostile beaches. The UDTs proved all of these assumptions wrong. They did the impossible because they'd been trained to believe that impossible just meant nobody's done it yet. That mindset, more than any specific technique or tactic, became their greatest legacy. In 2000, a memorial was dedicated at Fort Pierce, Florida, at the original UDT training site. The names of UDT and SEAL personnel killed in action are engraved on black granite panels. The memorial includes a bronze statue of a frogman emerging from the water, knife in hand, scanning the beach ahead. The inscription reads simply, "The only easy day was yesterday." That phrase, which became the unofficial motto of the Navy SEALs, captures the essence of what those first UDT volunteers created. Not a job that got easier with experience, but a standard that demanded continuous improvement. Not a skill that could be mastered, but a challenge that tested you every single day. The Frogmen of World War II swam into history at Tarawa, though they didn't exist yet. They were created by that disaster, forged by necessity, proven in combat, and refined through experience. They transformed from beach surveyors into warriors, from support troops into special operations pioneers. The disaster at Tarawa created a requirement. Fort Pierce created a training program. Combat operations created a capability. And the courage of volunteers who chose to swim toward enemy guns rather than away from them created a legacy that endures 80 years later. Every Navy SEAL who completes training today does so because someone in 1944 decided that swimming into hostile beaches was possible. that obstacles could be cleared under fire, that reconnaissance could be conducted in daylight, that men could be trained to do what everyone said couldn't be done. The flying milk bottles of the Army Air Force earned respect by proving their critics wrong. The frogmen of the Navy earned their legacy the same way, by doing the impossible, by refusing to quit, by swimming toward danger when every instinct screamed to swim away. From Tarawa's disaster to Okinawa's triumph took less than 2 years. In that time, the United States Navy created a capability that changed amphibious warfare forever. The beaches of Normandy were surveyed by combat engineers working from landing craft. The beaches of the Pacific were cleared by swimmers working underwater under fire. The difference in casualties was stark. Where obstacles and underwater defenses weren't cleared, landings became bloodbaths. Where UDTs went in first, landings succeeded with minimal losses. The correlation was undeniable. Maritime special operations worked. The frogmen proved it. And every operation since, every beach cleared, every obstacle destroyed, every reconnaissance mission completed, every SEAL team deployment over the past 8 decades traces back to that moment when someone decided that the disaster at Tarawa must never happen again. The men who created the UDTs weren't superhuman. They were volunteers who responded to a need. They were trained beyond normal limits because the mission required it. They succeeded because failure meant Americans would die. That simple equation, lives saved through impossible missions, became the foundation of naval special warfare. The frogmen of World War II didn't just scout beaches. They didn't just clear obstacles. They created a tradition that continues today, proving that with the right people, the right training, and the right motivation, the impossible becomes possible. The only easy day was yesterday. Tomorrow's mission will be harder, but it will be accomplished because men trained to Navy SEAL standards don't quit. They never have. Not since that first class reported to Fort Pierce in 1944 and learned that swimming into enemy guns was just another day at the office. That's the legacy of the first frogmen. That's the origin of the Navy SEALs. That's what was born from the disaster at Tarawa and proven in the waters off Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. The beaches were cleared. The mission was accomplished. The standard was set. And 80 years later, men still volunteer to meet that standard, to swim toward danger, to do what everyone says can't be done, because the frogmen proved it could.